Boulder, Colorado is a unique place. The physical beauty alone can take one's breath away. But combined with a stunning landscape is a community of smart, creative, innovative people. We have a remarkable number of highly accomplished individuals who've chosen to live here in Boulder. Whether through sports, science, technology, innovation, art, music, natural foods, Boulder seems to attract the extraordinary. The Boulder History Museum is thrilled that we've been able to capture the stories of Nobel laureates, Olympic champions, best-selling authors, world-class musicians, all who live and work right here in Boulder, Colorado. I'm sure you're going to find their stories as fascinating as I have. Welcome to Boulder Conversations with Extraordinary People.
Well, I'm going to start at pretty near the very beginning. You can see that. But actually, I'll tell you a little more than that. It turns out my grandmother was born very near here and shows up apparently living in Louisville as the daughter of a saloon keeper. So I was told that makes me some kind of son of Colorado. But anyway, I was born in Oklahoma, and I can't claim any place as my home until I moved to Boulder, because all my life, my dad worked in the oil business, and we moved. We never lived anywhere longer than 2.5 years, and often less than that. So that sort of accounts for a lot of my restless nature or interest in traveling, that kind of thing. And Venezuela was the first place we moved to shortly after I was born. And Egypt was another one, a fascinating place. I loved it. That was kind of the real happy time of my life. Around 8 to 10 years old, kind of thing. We were evacuated in the 1956 Suez crisis. We might actually have lived there longer, but except for that. And many of the kids nobody had jobs, so while the dads were out looking for jobs, we tried to follow school, in this case in Switzerland. And the guy on the right, he was my best friend from Egypt and lives in Durango. We still stay in touch, and he'll show up in a picture or two. My sister and her mother's. So that year I went to a variety of schools, Egypt, Switzerland, Catholic school on Long Island, and that's where I failed my first subjects. I'm afraid I didn't know anything about that sort of thing. And hopefully it won't come back to bite me. It hasn't yet. Maybe they're waiting for the big bite. And this is a picture from that Outward Bound course. I was going to high school in Indiana and got a scholarship to this brand new entity, and it proved to be it really set me off on the wrong track, I guess. Paul Petzold there, standing up with a rope around him, he was the main climbing instructor at that time. He went on to do other things after Outward Bound, but he was the guy, and among other things, he showed films from K2 in 1938 and things like that, and for a teenager, that makes a big impact on you, especially back then. You didn't have access to that kind of thing. And where we are on Snowmass, my first 14er. And the other guy that was there that kind of ended up being a long-term inspiration of a completely different sort, less of a mountaineer, But far more of a rock climber was Harvey Carter there on the right. He was a outward bound instructor then. There he is talking to Ray Northcutt on the left. So those people, events like that in a young person's life really have a big effect. So the very next summer after Outward Bound, my friend Rob and I guess somehow we felt we knew how to climb or something like that. We went to the Alps, and among other things, we did climb the Matterhorn. We had no rope. We just sort of said, well, we're going to be as careful as we can be, and if we get to something we don't think we can down climb, we'll turn around. That's just the deal. And we ended up on top and couldn't go any further, so we turned around. We bought a rope after that, actually, too. So that trip, Rob knew about the Colorado Mountain Club. He was from Denver, and Dale Johnson was leading a Colorado Mountain Club trip. So I joined the club, and we had connections with them in and out, and did a little bit of the climbing with them that summer, and that was really our kind of big breakthrough. So that was how that association, Colorado Mountain Club, began with me. This is actually a shot on that trip on the Matterhorn. You can sort of see the gear's a little bit different, but it's just clothing and packs. It's not that different. And that's a later picture. I climbed it again with a friend, and that's the top. Nice views. Now, at that point, I was going to school at Rice University, which is not a good choice for a person that loved the mountains. It's about as far as you can get. But I did meet Rob and some other friends, and we drove down to Mexico to climb the volcanoes. And this is on Popo, which is closed now because of eruptions, activity, I should say. There I am wearing a Hollybar NP22 parka with a rappel patch. That was an extra $3, I think. So in 1967, I'd been going to geology field camp, and Rice University didn't have a field camp, so you got to go to an approved one. The approved one I chose was in Colorado, and during the course of the camp, this unusual thing happened. The professor came and announced one dinner, said there was a professor at the university who had been to Antarctica numerous times since the 30s, and he needs an assistant. And you can apply for the job. And I got the job. And so in the winter of 67, 68, I was enrolled in grad school at Texas Tech. I was still going to Rice, and the draft board was going nuts. They were just sure I was fudging things around. That was the Vietnam time, and they thought this guy is up to no good at all, which was true. But anyway, that's the plane we flew down on. Interminable flight, it seemed. There's Doc Wade, and boy, he could tell stories. And again, it's this sort of same effect on a young guy. You meet these people that have had a life of this various kinds of adventure, and it had a large effect on me. Bob Mygetter and I just took off one day and climbed that mountain, and boy, did that make people unhappy. Because back then, they were not excited about rescues or any form of play. You just didn't do that. They hid the skis from us, and there were some down there. We found them. And we were scientists, supposed to be scientists, and so we got in a bit of trouble that way. There we are on the climb. Now, if you look, oh, no, here's where I need the pointer. Well, I don't have it. Here we are. I have a finger. Right up here. I just kind of circled. Those are tracks from the airplane and the tracks around the camp. So that's where we started from. It was that was hours and hours of post holing. And you notice Bob's pretty tired. Finally, the helicopter was put together and we went to fly. That's our state-of-the-art equipment. And we did actually do some geology and biology, mapping, and so on. This is at the end of the stay. We stayed for the summer, and by that time, McMurdo, you see in the background, it's kind of a bunch of plywood sheds and things like that, and the water is open, and the Coast Guard the breaker comes in with supplies. So it wasn't really a recreational destination at that time. Less than a year before I was down there, I had read in National Geographic how the first ascents of the peaks in the Vinson Massif had happened. And that was another one of those things. And then to be there and be that close, and just these desires get planted, all these seeds. Weeds, you could call them, because they wouldn't die. That's inside Scott's hut there. There's frozen, kind of freeze-dried seal carcasses outside. It stays cold. That could change, I guess. So at Texas Tech, I failed my physical, so I didn't go to Vietnam. I had a lot of asthma throughout my life, so that was legitimate, believe it or not. And it comes and goes and so on. But so at the last minute, I continued in graduate school after I graduated from Rice at Texas Tech. So that was halfway to the mountains. And I got paid to go there, so I had always paid my way in the world and got through college and all that stuff with no debt. And I drove out there, and then a friend of mine and I had heard about Shiprock, and we went out there to try to climb it. We drove straight across the desert to the rock after camping, finding no roads whatsoever. And of course, later we found there's an easy way to drive out there. And the side on the kind of the center right is where we tried to climb, which is not where the route goes, the normal route. And we had no qualifications to climb anything other than that. So we didn't get very far. But a month later, I was back with some other friends, Rob Blair again, and the guy on the right, Gil Harder, he died later on Annapurna. And he was also one of those very driven climbers. He trained like a maniac and climbed Nanda Devi. Anyway, we did climb the mountain by the normal route and had a wonderful time doing it, climbed up and down, did everything free but the rappels. Good success. It turns out I think there are 5-10 moves on that, but I had no idea what that kind of grade was. We just climbed it. So good thing we were young and could do that. Also, while I was at grad school, I, again, hungry for adventure, and we weren't very far from Guadalupe Peak and El Capitan here in Texas. Guadalupe Peak on the left is the highest peak in Texas. And just up in the same bunch of limestone, a bit further north, is where Carlsbad Caverns is. So the faces there are around 1,000 feet high, and we went up there and scouted around a little bit, picked a climb, a line, and made probably the first ascent of one of those faces with very primitive gear and primitive techniques and so on. Well, it was pretty bad rock, and there were a lot of, we kind of chose these big chimneys and grooves because you could kind of stuff yourself in there and blow it up like a chuckwalla and not come out. So there was an element of safety to that when you can just ooze back down, and not the safest climb in the world either. But by then I'd gone to the University of Colorado in the summer of 1965, and that also made me a bit more familiar with Colorado's mountains and more with rock climbing and so on. And I just kept coming back to Colorado and back to Boulder. And even though one summer I traveled around the West trying to think, well, no, where am I going to move to? And realistically, I thought, I've got to work for a living, but where could I work and actually go climbing after work or before work or go bouldering or something like that? And Boulder was the place. There were a number of possibilities for work, and I ended up getting a job at Holly Bar. You see some of the gear back there. Very fortunate to do that, and there were other options in town too, which also would have been fortunate. I was lucky to get a job at all. They didn't look at how much I didn't work. And Boulder was different back in the 60s. They tolerated all sorts of misbehavior, much better than they do now. You can't do that now, and you're not supposed to do that either. I guess you can without a tent, or what, I don't know the rules. But Anyway, the climbing is fantastic, and it really was what I had hoped for. You had a job, in this case, a job directly related to climbing. And the good thing, too, about Halubar is they sold cross-country skis, and I knew about skiing from Switzerland. I didn't know how to ski, just about skiing. I never could turn those things. But cross-country was something we could afford. It didn't cost anything to go anywhere. Wonderful thing. So I began to learn that and continue climbing. Even in the winter, I climbed quite a bit. Beautiful places to climb around here. El Dorado Canyon's world famous. Boulder Canyon has good small things. Lumpy Ridge has wonderful climbing. We would even go up there in the winter and try. This is on the first Flatiron, coming down the fast way. And it worked out okay because we realized in the winter you're wearing an awful lot of clothing, and you're kind of like one of these football players. You can't be hurt. And it worked. And there's a big pile of snow at the bottom to land in, too. But this is on the third Flatiron. We had all the adventures in the world just right here at our back door, and you could do them in a day or half a day. Didn't have to have any money to go anywhere. You could just go there. So these were the kind of things we did. And I kept dreaming about bigger things, and that if you do this kind of stuff, that's on top of the third Flatiron, almost dark. But we figured, well, we'll be prepared for anything that comes our way. So that was kind of the life strategy in the climbing sense. That's on top of Cussin Crack, actually, just coming out the top. And Jackson's Wall up on Castle Rock. Some of you know that. And that's tough. That was a particularly tough one with snow all over it. Oh, and this one, that's the top of Wind Ridge. We climbed it during a blizzard after work in the dark and bivvied below the overhang on it, and then finished up in the morning and got to work on time. So we had a lot of ways to have fun. And there were the 14ers to explore. This one did with some friends, Vinnie Elwood. Some of you know him. Kent Groninger, Ken Moore. And we're on top of Capitol there, and our other friends haven't made it yet. And Ken and I decided to wait. And unfortunately, that storm missed us. But we didn't have gear, so we had a very cold night of it. But they came up. It was all okay. Another shot of El Dorado there, the Bastille, and Lumpy Ridge, one of my very favorite places to climb up in Rocky Mountain National Park. Because you're going to see a big variety of climbing. Big climbs, Himalayan climbs, aid climbs with a lot of gear, or much simpler climbing with a very small amount of gear, which is really my favorite thing. Can't climb maybe as hard, but it's a different kind of hard, and I prefer it. Alpine climbs up in the park. Beautiful stuff. All kinds of difficulty levels. Chris Reevely and I were just talking. The crux when you get older is just getting to the climbs. And I know some older folks that are that way. I've several 80-year-olds that have taken climbing, and the approach is the tough part, and it probably will be for us too. Notch Top there, and Long's Peak is a wonderful climb. Now, just mentioning that 14er, I'm not a collector person, although I've almost done half the 14ers now. But I've done Long's Peak more times than I've done all the other 14ers put together. It's just I like the mountain, and it's got more technical routes and good rock, and it's in the backyard there. That's a particularly pretty little line, that ridge. You can see a person standing on the ledge. That's the Narrows on Long's Peak, that ledge. And that's one of those climbs I'd wanted to do for years. And like I say, it's not very hard. It's an old Alexander climb, and went up with a friend and did it. So it's fun to explore these little old things. And I enjoy history, probably from living in Egypt and studying about all the old Mediterranean history and so on, much more than you get in the States. Other backyard things, well, we did Notch Couloir in the winter, and then the Diamond, that diamond-shaped upper portion of Long's Peak, kind of a winter prize, and that took us numerous times going in and out. A very short weather windows, so we never got anywhere to speak of. And when we finally did climb it, we spent 3 nights in hammocks up there, homemade, by the way, like a whole lot of my stuff. That's a bad picture, but it's from a little Super 8 film, so that's why those aren't very good. And that was the second winter ascent of it. We weren't thinking especially of that. It just seemed like another thing to do to extend ourselves in our local playground. So I was just happy as you could be, like a circus clown. I was just, that's on top of the third Flatiron. And, what could be better? And eventually, after working for Hollybar for a couple of years maybe, I can't remember exactly, two good winters, and learning what I could and so on, there's a variety of things, but I was possessed and opened my little shop. And a friend of mine that's what Mike Munger, but not the guy I opened it kind of with, my first employee, Paul Parker. He convinced me he knew something about boot repair, which turned out to be a little less than I thought. But anyway, we learned it's not that hard. So, and he moved on. He got into bicycles and left me with this. And I figured it out. It wasn't magic. And I'm kind of handy with my hands anyway. And I really enjoyed it. If you did a good job, people liked you. They were happy with what you did. I sold a very, very small amount of climbing gear and cross-country skis right from the start. And eventually we moved a couple of times and ended up where we are now, in Table Mesa Shopping Center. You can have fun there too. Back then, again, the size of our vacations got a little bit bigger. We were able to take a whole week off and go out to Yosemite, and we managed to climb. Mike and I drove out there and climbed Salathé Wall there with the big heart right in the middle of it. And like I say, that's the messy, complicated kind of climbing. Still a big adventure. It requires new skills. There, you have to use your imagination a little bit, but you're looking straight up a chimney, and you place the protection in the back corner of the chimney, and then you have to chimney out horizontally, a bit over 1,000 feet off the ground, to get around the outside. Very spectacular pitch. And there are other chimneys, and it's a great climb, one of the great rock climbs of the world. So we had a very, very fun time on that climb. In that case, it was in the high 90s down in the valley, and we're on the south-facing wall, and we ended up hauling over 100 pounds of water and drinking all of it during the course of this thing. Easy hauling once you got up high. Nothing to drag the pack on. And Mike was getting a little dirty there. He had this habit of the aluminum gets on your hands. It kind of turns them black, and then he was always wiping his face. And he didn't know it, but he looked pretty bad. And we didn't wash our hands for dinner either. That's the last place we spent the night. We were actually having such a good time. We just were almost sad it was over. And at the top, we laid our gear out. Usually you do this planning the thing, but we laid it out afterwards. Partly because we wanted to show how many pitons we'd taken out of the climb, which is most of those. And we actually sold them and got enough money to pay for our gas. 2 years later, we did the North America wall. You can see the dark spot that looks rather like North America, and it's a complicated route up that very steep face. And at the time, was one of the really big, hard aid climbs in the valley. Mike was using some cut-off knicker socks, probably had holes in the heels, so he threw the bottoms away, and that was his knee pads. He forgot his shoes, so he's using mine, and I was using the ones that I'd bought 13 years earlier from Hollybar. They're now retired in the store. Modern shoes don't last that long. But it was a very different kind of climb than Salathé Wall. The rock wasn't as good and much more gear intensive. But that's okay. It's a learning experience, and I've always been interested in all these aspects of climbing, even if they ultimately are not my favorite. I want to experience them and to a level of becoming fairly good at them. And so that's what we were doing. And it's a spectacular climb. They all are. Spend the night on these little ledges. In this case, you have to go down around the corner to get up over that bulge. That's the last really hard part. In the other little playground we had, you could easily go to the Tetons for a week and do all kinds of stuff. Rock climbs, kind of easier alpine climbs like the East Ridge here, snow and ice climbs, enclosure, ice couloir, the north face of the Grand. It's just always an adventure to be had up there. And a week was a great time because you could go up there and fail and still have time to try again. Or if you made it, you could do something else. That's the top of the black ice couloir there. That's on Mount Moran. Dave Harrower there. Some of you might know Dave. So there's Dave finishing that up. And then we finally had, this was 1967, finally had saved up enough to think, let's go to McKinley with some friends, and we did. And we learned all sorts of new things about avalanches. Like, where's the route there? And for that matter, where's the route anywhere? We weren't sure which way to go. And we learned the hard way about really big loads. We thought backpacking was big loads. There's nothing like this. In fact, sometimes you just collapse under the load, and if you had an unsympathetic partner, you had to figure out how to get up by yourself. And we learned about crevasses, because we don't really have those here in Colorado. That's the one thing we're lacking. But still, it was a great experience, and virtually all the clothing I have on there, the down jacket, the pants, the overboots, all that stuff was homemade. Now, so we thought we'd learned about carrying loads on McKinley. Finally got to go to Nepal in 1981. We saw these guys really know how to carry loads and know how to work and be cheery. They were wonderful people. And awkward loads, that's a teamwork thing, carrying that long bunch of pipe. They have invented the wheel, but there's a lot of places it doesn't work. But these guys figured it out. And the kids are really cute, and everyone was friendly, and we just had a great time. See, he's learning young. He wants to grow up and be like his dad. Take a nap anywhere. It's a talent. So we walked from just outside, we went during the monsoon, so we walked from just outside Kathmandu all the way to Ahmedabad, I think 3 weeks or something. Wonderful experience. Best trip ever that way. And we had to learn about the leeches. And every day it'd be like that. But you know, they're not that bad. They don't itch like mosquito bites and stuff. But what a beautiful walk in. Finally reaching the Dudkosi Valley, where we turn left and head up towards Everest and the high peaks. And in that region where the Sherpas are, and they have the big mountains there, a little bit more wealthy, so the tea shops are a little nicer and so on. And nowadays it's a completely different world, I'm told. And they have a market there. You can resupply, kind of like farmer's market here in Boulder. Bargain, look at all the vegetables. And oh, there's a picture from the Pearl Street Mall. Look at that. I can go back if you missed it. I'll bet he votes. Even the yaks, they breathe hard too. And there's our peak. And to make a long story short, we did the first post-monsoon ascent. We were in small groups, so it's a very tight little route, and you didn't have room for a lot of people at the same time. Part of the group got to the summit, came back down. We only took 300 feet of rope, so we didn't have a lot of fixed rope and all that stuff like they do now. And I tried to go up with Ben, and he got really sick, and these are just some shots from the climbing. But anyway, we came down, and that was the end of the expedition. Kind of not happy ending for me, or him really. But then when I went back up, to clean up camp. With Ben and his girlfriend stayed up there, and everyone else left. I went back up with Ben and his girlfriend, and then I said, well, I'll go up and at least clean the gear as far as I can. We need those tents and stuff. And so I went back up and kind of kept going, and I had a piece of rope about 100 feet for belaying myself in hard spots. That's about it, and ended up being on top. There's my companion. So after 4.5 days, I did the climb. When Peter Hobbler was doing a show at the store, he mentioned that he did it in 4.5 hours. But for me, it's a bigger challenge. See, I got more out of it than he did. And when we got back down to Lukla, the big airfield there that everyone flies into, we actually were able to catch a flight out. They had just got the field dried out enough. After that, the next thing, kind of new adventure that I really wanted to do, and I was beginning to be able to afford it. The store is a little bit bigger. And the store was kind of always a means to do these things, either through connections or trying to earn a living and save some money or whatever. But we began selling alpine touring skis, and I learned how to ski them. I worked really hard one winter to do that. And some friends and I went over and skied the haute route the first time, and I have numerous times since. And you don't always ski uphill. You sometimes carry your stuff. There's Mont Blanc in the background. And there's a much later trip. That's actually Bibi sitting down here at the table with a torn ACL that she hasn't had diagnosed yet, but it was bad. She'd side slip and traverse and then lay in the snow. We'd flop her skis over the other way, and she'd get up and that was how, but she did the whole thing. And there were just a few shots of alpine touring. We really came to like it. Not particularly the blister side of it, but with modern gear, you really shouldn't be getting blisters. They have much better liners and so on. Occasionally a ladder to climb. That's the Silvretta horn in Austria. So that's something we came to really like. And the Alps in general, I always wanted to go back and climb, and I have been able to do some, not nearly what I'd like to. It's always a matter of priorities and timing. But fantastic playground. It's easy to see why so much climbing started early there. So whether it's summer or spring or whatever, you can do fantastic climbs there. And not always hard, just the setting can't be beat. It's kind of like the Flatirons. You really can't beat that. That's just all right above Chamonix. And if the weather's bad in the Alps, you go down to the coast, Mediterranean coast, and go climbing. I wish I could say that's my corporate yacht, but it isn't. Now, very fortunately, in 1983, it's actually 82, but these guys, Dick Bass and Frank Wells, there's Frank, wanted to climb. They were going to try to climb the 7 summits of the 7 continents, all in that year, and very ambitious for non-climbers. But they trained hard, and they had done some practice climbs. And on very short notice, they tried to put a team together to go to Everest in 83. And I was one of the guys that got called up. All the good guys were already on trips, or else they thought these guys were nuts and they weren't going to waste their time. So they put a team together. There's the whole team, Sherpas and Westerners. I mean, it's small by modern standards. The budget for the whole thing is $200,000 for all of us. Now, we were not guides. None of us were. We had to pay our way over there. We had to outfit ourselves. They covered the expenses on the mountain. So, and none of us were expected to climb with them any particular time. If it worked out that way, that was the deal. But they were very generous with it. They needed somebody to put the route in and advise them and whatever. But we were not guides in any normal sense of the word. No one was. That's Ridgway's tent, but I like the prayer flags between the peaks. He really had it figured out. Now, our ladder system was not as good as they are now. We did have ladders, but they didn't always stay put. That one, you notice the left end is loose. And at the end, it's going like this, and you're trying to get off the end. Kind of spooky. Or sometimes the whole thing would collapse, and you'd just have to figure it out all over again. And nowadays, the Sherpas have whole crews that put the route in and maintain it. But we don't have that. In spite of its kind of treacherous, threatening nature, it's very beautiful also. And there I go, being happy again. That's at 20-something thousand feet, I don't know. So a few quick shots of Everest. There they go. When it's time to move baggage, those guys know how to move baggage. So we made it on a pretty good day. Again, the budget for our personal use is very different than it was now. I had one oxygen bottle and spent 3 nights on the South Col with no oxygen and so on and so forth, and that's just what you did. And, it was off a lot of the time going up, and then it would be on if I had to break deep trail. Other adventures that, excuse me, squeezed in there. This is in Africa, the Ruwenzori Mountains of the Moon. That's the most amazing jungle I've ever seen. We'd heard of the vertical bog on Mount Kenya and other places, but the Ruwenzori is the real jungle. They had a hut system when the British used to run the place, but they've burnt most of the wood, like the doors and so on, and there's not much there, and I believe a lot of that's rebuilt now. But at the time, Idi Amin had just been thrown out, so things were pretty primitive. And you could hardly find the trail. Really quite remarkable. That's the missing link. Or that's what I thought. And then it turns out it was one of our porters chasing a monkey, which they later ate. They ate anything they could catch, which was like everything that moved. They were really good at it. And you had to dress like that. You know, to try to wear a waterproof boot is impossible because the boot would fill with mud. I couldn't. The locals wore these big rubber boots, and they never went in past their ankles, and somehow that never worked for me. So I just wore runners. Anyway, there's the Stanley Massif up there. A little bit of the climbing. They have their share of bad weather, but it's not all bad. Our camp was down there by the lake. Really a wonderful place. Here in the room, it was a scorpion. And I chased BB out and lassoed it with dental floss. And then there are the animals. And the animals like it when we go on safari too. And you really see nature in action, things eating each other and so on. And you could occasionally, if you were a good hunter, you could find a cheetah with babies, maybe even. Hard to find that stuff. And just the most exotic of trees, too. But back to the mountains. Now, from Amet Ablam, I had this view of Makalu. Then from Everest, too, it's the same view. And when I got done with Amet Ablam, the first mountain, I got home and I was pretty excited. I thought, now I got to try something really high, sample that. And I did a little research on the 8,000 meter peaks, and Makalu is one of the safer ones. What I didn't research was the fact that it has one of the worst success rates. But safety, I was more concerned about that. So, Amet Ablam was 81. I got the permit for Makalu for 87, thinking it's going to take me that long to save up the money. And I knew it would take a little more just because it's a more remote mountain and so on, a bigger mountain. And in the meantime, I was invited to Everest, so I didn't do that, but I did go back to Makalu. Very long approach compared to Everest. Those loops of cord there, hemp and so on, they wrap them around their tennis shoes for traction. I call them Sherpa crampons. Kind of like tire chains. That's what they do. And we were there in a bad year. Only one other 8,000 meter peak was climbed that season. And Makalu, we were lucky, got up it. But it was a big challenge. We didn't have a bunch of high altitude porters, that kind of thing, and lost a few tents up there to some major winds. That guide fared worse than we did. Kind of reminds you to be careful. So again, one group got to the summit. I'd been fairly sick, actually, with a terrible lung thing. And the summit is up on that little tower. A little bit challenging to get up there. And they came down and ordered up the porters to take us home. And I said, well, don't I get a chance? And I said, yep, you got 5 days. That's what it's going to take them to get here. And it's a long story, but I did make it up. Went something like 18 hours without anything to eat and just about that much to drink. And there's a story behind all that. And anyway, we all came out of it okay. I'm laying there very, very tired with some frostbitten fingers. But they're all okay. Still got them. And that's Kilimanjaro, another African trip. Tanzania, a very friendly place. We liked it. Nice people, strange businesses there. That sounds like the Pearl Street Mall. Never did go in there. We were fortunate that the weather was actually poor, and we did all the lower stuff in bad weather, and there was nearly nobody on the mountain, and the whole upper part of the mountain was snow, because otherwise it's just slogging up volcanic gravel. We went up the tourist route, the Coca-Cola route, and found it really nice. And the Norwegians have built all these little A-frame huts in the lower camps, which really reduces a lot of the impact from tents and all that kind of thing. And we just had a great time on there. Nice porters. Had to hold the sign up, kind of the parts, and put them together. And there's our little group. Mount Kenya, went back there. The climbing route goes up that ridge between the shadow and the sun. A shot or two. And there it's outlined with the cloud a little bit. Gorgeous mountain. And then trekked around it. And the signs you see for the trails give you compass headings, because they have a lot of fog and rain there. You can't see. So you need that compass. But nobody there. It's just so nice. Peaceful, exploring. Now, back off to another expedition, 1997. So 10 years after Makalu, Pakistan. And the approaches to the area where K2 is are very, very long and incredibly rugged. And the people there are just the toughest I've ever seen. And they were all there waiting to be hired, and I imagine we hired most of them. We started out with just over 200 porters, and by the time you get in there, you probably have 20. Because all the others are carrying food for each other and each other and each other, and you know how that goes. But it was rugged trekking. And the range, like in Nepal, it's relatively quiet. Here, it's just constant rumbling and stonefall and rivers and creaking and groaning and cracking. So very, very different mountains, very active and beautiful, spectacular mountains. And finally, there's our peak. And the glacier, I knew some people who had climbed it the year before, and it took them 3 or 4 days to find the route through the glacier because they had tons of snow, all covered up like it should be. And here it was very, very dry, and took us a couple of weeks to work a route out through there. And we didn't take a lot of ropes to fix, so we just had to figure out a route that didn't require ropes. And it worked. We just had to go together roped up all the time. And a very convoluted maze-like route This is actually on a section where we're trying to avoid the glacier on the side of the mountain, and it ended up being difficult trail breaking, and then we decided it's too dangerous anyway. So we went back out to the middle of the glacier and kept working away at that. And after we got the route put in up to the base of the mountain, something like 16 expeditions showed up. This is 1997. And they were fun expeditions. And so the Japanese showed up. They fixed ropes all through the icefall. And then people started going through it all unroped, and numerous people would go in crevasses, or the anchors move and become loose and whatever. And then they start having accidents. When you go in there roped up together, you don't really do that. But there's the peak. The route follows from lower left to upper right, more or less along that ridge. And what a wonderful place. And that's our high camp. That's looking down from the high camp. Anatoly Bukriev there, he's a good friend, and he's also dead, died on Annapurna on Christmas Day that year. Got a Christmas card from him later. Very sad. That's Anatoly. He was villainized in Krakauer's book and a movie, and then later recognized as a hero that actually saved a lot of people and so on. He was a remarkable guy, and he couldn't speak very good English, so he was an easy target, and I felt bad for him. So did a lot of people, but that's just life. Easy targets get hit. This is on the summit. My mostly climbing partner for virtually the whole trip, Bob Ader there, can't really see his face. And then we trekked out a different way, which was also very exciting and beautiful. That's BB. Other little adventures back to Yosemite. Diane on the right she worked for me for 12 years, I think, and we climbed a lot together. And there we are, just getting warmed up with Half Dome in the background. And we did it for my 48th birthday. Here's another wild little trip. As we began to start to save up a little money and make better connections, we could pull some of these things off. But I was actually invited to Spitsbergen to do a little talk in New Olesen, which is not where tourists go up there. It's a place where they do scientific research, and it gets very elaborate. I mean, no cell phones, no nothing. And the first course I was up there at was called Health Protection and Survival in Cold Environments for industrial and military people, mainly oil rig, offshore oil rig workers and all that. And anyway, it was wonderful to be invited. And then later I was invited back again with BB, and this is just a couple of pictures from that. I'm not sure what she's so animated about there. I have no idea. That's in Spitsbergen. It's about 80 degrees north of Norway. It's like close to 600 miles or something from the North Pole. This is the kind of thing you'd do is either test things like these different suits floating in the water, or with probes and temperature things and all that, or there were lectures about how they do the testing, how they develop the products or critique products. Very, very interesting. That's some of the very ancient ice there. And this guy decided, well, it's apparently very good in Scotch. Apparently. It's an almost midnight sun. And the other thing that we've done in recent years, and we're trying to count, is probably at least 10 trips to Norway. Ski touring and occasionally doing a ski marathon or something like that. And hiking too. It's a magic land. If you like cross-country skiing, it's incredible. And the hut system is way beyond what you could ever imagine if Colorado is all you know. One of my very earliest trips was with these 3 Norwegians. I knew one of them, and we skied from near Bergen to Oslo in 9 days. We had provisions for twice that long, but every day we'd get up and the weather would be like you see in the picture. So we'd do 2 stages and 2 stages and 2 stages, and we had 50-kilometer days and stuff like that with pretty heavy loads. But very wonderful tour, and after that I was just totally hooked. And you don't have to follow marked trails. They do have marked trails that have occasionally a snowmobile grooms it in the sense of just packing it, but you can just ski across the mountains anywhere you want to go. There's a hut. It's a complex. There are numerous buildings. In fact, the D&T, that's kind of like the Colorado Mountain Club, their modern rules state that they have to have at least 2 buildings. So if there's a fire, everyone can get in the other building for safety. It's happened where they've had a problem. Here we are actually in Sweden, just across the Norwegian border, skiing with the Hillebergs. Make those fine tents those. And a Norwegian guy took that picture of me trying out some new skis that Osnes was producing. Product testing, someone's got to do it. Still hadn't given up on El Cap, I guess. It really, the people are important. I'll go back and do a climb with people I like. And I'd never done the nose, the left profile, and did that with Julie Cheney. And the deal with her was we're going to swing leads. I wasn't going to just take her up a climb. And so we said, okay, and we knew it was going to be slow, but that's all right. And it was right after a week of wet snow and rain, and so there was nobody up there. And we saw one other party, and that wasn't that many years ago. Very hard to do that now. That's the famous king swing. And you, of course, have to eat that way. Another fine trip of recent years, Mount Elbrus, except this is on the north side, not the south side where most people go. And it's so lush and so beautiful and so few people, just a few farmers and sheep, that kind of thing. And eventually near the top, you run into the regular route and start seeing other people. What a fantastic thing. Then when we got down, they'd butchered a goat, cooked that for us, and we thought the food in Russia was going to be pathetic, and all the fresh vegetables and fruit, we've never eaten better. Wonderful stuff. Skiing in Yellowstone, that's another nearby thing you can do pretty easily. Or not so easily. Boy, I'm going to have to start my yoga up again to get across these things. And we're actually there on homemade skis. It's one of those little hobbies I've picked up and made about 10 pair now. And they ski as good as anything else. Well, I sold my business New Year's Eve. In fact, we were all on the conference call with the lawyers and just somebody finally said, when do we get to go home and drink? Because it was late. We finally got the deed done, and that's what we did. But the new owner, she's fantastic, Jen Mull. Her dad started Backwoods, their little chain, just a couple of months before I did, maybe 1 month, 40 years ago. And so it's still a family-owned business. We're their 9th store. We're different from all their other stores, and they kept our name because it is different, and they want it to stay different. And they like what we did. And even in this room, if you look at that display stuff there, that's the room where we've always done our shows, which has been almost weekly. And some clinics and ski making classes and so on. Well, she said, why don't you take that room and make a proper museum out of it? And so there you see some of the work. These are all little displays that tell stories with ski making in the back. That's a timeline on the back wall of climbing hardware. So you get the idea of what I've been doing with this stuff. And with all the travels, that's how I've collected it. It's mostly been gifts. The best things are gifts, flea market stuff of no value at the time. But I'm kind of a pack rat, and BB said, you can't bring that stuff home. So here it is. But for instance, the blue suit in that case, that's the down suit that Peter Hobler wore on the first ascent of Everest with no oxygen. So that's a special item, and it's a gift. And the boots in the lower part of the case, the black boots in the lower right, those Sherpa gave me, and they were used on Hillary's Everest expedition. I got Hillary to sign one of them. The yellow pants, I made those the night before I left for Everest, and because you couldn't buy down pants then, and filled them with pillow feathers. And they got me up, so it worked. So that's the kind of thing that's in there. There's some of the early, just the timeline business. And I'm sure a lot of you, if you go in there, are going to go, "Oops, I used to climb on that stuff." And a lot of parents bring their kids in, and "That's what you climbed on, Dad?" It's kind of fun being there when they come in. And we still have a lot of things in the main part of the store, too, that aren't over there on the dedicated museum trying to tell stories. So there's a lot to see all over the place. This is from a famous desert climb, some of the old gear that one of the first ascent party donated to me. And now, this is a fairly recent addition. That's a toe. He froze it on Long's Peak. He kept the other one. He froze both his big toes. And for instance, other famous people who have either done presentations for us or donated things or whatever. That's Ed Webster on the left comparing stumps with Maurice Herzog. Some of you might have read the book Annapurna. It's a fantastic book. Andrew Heckmeyer donated some gear from the first ascent of the north face of the Eiger there. Kurt Dienberger, he's done numerous shows for us. His climbing partner, Wolfie, Wolfgang Stefan, he's actually stayed more climbing fit than Kurt, and he's climbing there in El Dorado, finishing up a route called Rewritten. Peter Aschenbrenner, he was on Nanga Parbat in 32, 34, and 56. And he's in his 90s there, showing me gear. He never got rid of anything. He had a big attic or a tolerant wife, I don't know. Royal Robbins climbing with me in El Dorado there. And Anatoly, of course. And we were the only place he ever did shows because he was shy about his poor English. But he had a lot of friends here. Joran Kropp, climbing on the Bastille Crack there. Mike Banks from England. Chris Bonington, he's a very famous British climber. He loves to come over here and spend a few days climbing and do a talk or two and move on and do a few more days of climbing. He's very keen on it. And there he is on Rewritten, not many years ago. So he has stayed fairly climbing fit also. And Peter Hobler over there in Austria, he's donated some skis and his down suit. He donated his son for a year, and he went to high school at Fairview. we took care of him. He was a fantastic kid. Couldn't be better. So, before we head off home, this is the end of the show. We can open it up to a question and answer kind of thing. And I don't know if I've raised more questions than I've answered or the other way around, but there it is. Thank you for coming. And thanks so much to the museum, the Boulder History Museum, soon to change names, for putting the whole series on. And this is a really neat opportunity. We do a little bit of mix of this over at the store, but it's usually more how I spent my summer vacation than all these interesting other people that do so many different things. So it's really a wonderful thing that they're doing here.